All right, Notre Dame football fans. It is Tuesday night of Notre Dame's bye week. I am Tyler Horka. That's Patrick Engel. We're Notre Dame football beat writers for blueandgold.com, Blue and Gold Illustrated, and we're here during Notre Dame's bye week.
We make sure every stop on your road trip.
And I think that's an ad playing.
Is one you want to make. Get ready
Is that
for
you,
an
Pat?
adventure with a free brake
Man,
check.
I hope not.
$50 off brake service instantly.
I don't see any of those.
Oh, yeah. Okay, that's me. So, here we are. That's
right.
a great way to lead us off here. Like we were saying, it's Tuesday night. Notre Dame is on a bye week. A little bit early for a bye week. I think there's a lot of people out there that just saw Notre Dame play against North Carolina, and they would love to keep playing this Saturday, but that's not the case. Notre Dame is practicing about 3 or 4 times this week, and then they're going to have the weekend off. They're going to be at home watching games. The coaching staff is going to be on the road looking at prospective players all over the country on the recruiting trail. So be on the lookout. Mike Singer at blueandgold.com does an excellent job covering Notre Dame recruiting for us. But Patrick, we're going to talk a little bit of football with the current guys that are playing for Notre Dame over the next hour or so. So we'll kind of start at the beginning here. It's only 4 games in. Like I said, usually you get a bye week a little later, but Notre Dame is 2-2, and it's been a turbulent 2-2, I would say. Down and then up. I wouldn't even call it up and down because it was literally down and then up. They lost to Ohio State in that season opener. I think a lot of people came away feeling pretty good. Marshall was rock bottom when you lose 26-21 at home against a MAC school that has not won a football game since. That is kind of concerning. I'm not a big transitive property guy, but you can't help but look at that. But then Notre Dame beats Cal with a backup quarterback and goes on the road and has an offensive outburst against North Carolina with that backup quarterback being Drew Pyne. We're going to talk a lot about him over the next hour or so. But Patrick, all of that, considering Notre Dame's 2-2 record, where are you at with this team? I'm sure you've adjusted your expectations, but how are you feeling about Notre Dame football right now?
So you're not a transitive property guy. So you mean you don't think Bowling Green would beat Notre Dame?
I don't think so. I'm not going to put my money on that one. I'm not a betting guy either, but I'm definitely not betting on that.
No. And man, Mac, put some respect on the Sun Belt's name. That was a big week for the Sun Belt with Marshall and Georgia Southern and App State was it. But yeah, let's get to, like you said, up then down or down then up. And really, there's been like enough turbulence or speed bumps or potholes or whatever you want to call them in 4 games that, to span a whole season and maybe more than the last couple seasons combined, at least before Brian Kelly left for LSU. And I mean, think about it right now, like what, 8 wins would probably feel like a good outcome considering it all. And just even in the last like 3 weeks, think of how many different ways that would have been viewed. Like if you told someone after Notre Dame lost to Ohio State and only gave up 21 points to an offense that since has been on a roll, you say 8 wins and people would think you're a moron. And then they lose to Marshall and you think, where are you getting to 4 wins, let alone 8? And now after just finding something that seemingly works, albeit maybe less consistent or still a little bit prove it with Drew Pyne and the defense that's kind of come around, like I think that feels like the baseline or what would be a good outcome for a season that's, like we said, had all this turbulence. And want to be careful of like what one game against a bad defense with a quarterback who started the season of a backup, of just reading too much into that. But I think it got rid of the idea that like the rest of this season is going to be a slog every single week where you have to win every single game, like 17-13 or something like that. Like there will be other bad defenses on the schedule. There's a Navy, there's a Stanford, there's UNLV in theory, even though they just beat the reigning Mountain West champs. And enough of those left on the schedule to think, okay, what you saw against North Carolina isn't going to be a one-off, or at least you can take care of most of the games that look like Notre Dame should win just based on talent alone and was used to winning the last 5 years. And then really you forget the opponent for a minute. I think the harmony that you saw between Tommy Rees and Drew Pyne in that North Carolina game is maybe the takeaway that feels less like opponent reliant, and something that if you want to look at something that's, all right, this is a really good sign for what's coming up next, I think that would be it.
Okay, so for me, it's Notre Dame had a pretty similar schedule to start the year last year. Take Ohio State out of it. Obviously, Ohio State is an anomaly compared to the last 2 years. You don't play the number 2 team on the country on the road in a lot of years. They did that this year, but say Cincinnati was Notre Dame's Ohio State last year, and I know that came in game 5, and this is only game 4, but we're talking during the bye week. So you had some games on the schedule where, to me, Marshall was like Toledo last year, where Notre Dame could have easily lost that game to Toledo, and then they end up losing to Cincinnati. And then all of a sudden they're looking at 3-2 after 5 games. I think this year Notre Dame could easily be looking at 3-2 after 5 games. BYU, we'll get at the end to what we think is going to happen the rest of the way, but I think BYU in a week and a half is very beatable. So if Notre Dame is sitting there at 3-2 after 5 games, and they could have easily been 3-2 last year, are they that far off is the question that I'm asking from where they were last year. And I know the offense is pretty far off, and the only time they have looked really good this season would be against North Carolina last week, and North Carolina can't stop anybody. They can't stop a nosebleed. So, but what I'm saying is everyone was panicking after 0-2, and I thought they looked really good against Ohio State. And then against Marshall, they're maybe a pick 6 away from winning that game at home. And against Toledo, it was kind of the same thing. They needed a last-minute drive. So if you were in the camp, and I might have been in this camp, I might have had 1 foot in, 1 foot out type of thing where I was panicking about the Notre Dame season a little bit after 2 games. I think they've righted the ship in the way that they needed to, especially with the backup quarterback in Drew Pyne, because once you were 0-2 and Tyler Buchner was out of the equation, I think a lot of people were in that panic camp. But now you've kind of stepped out of it, and you're looking at the remaining schedule there, and you're saying, okay, you can beat BYU. They're not this formidable force. Stanford's terrible. UNLV is terrible. Syracuse is beatable. I know they're 4-0, but they're beatable. Clemson obviously is going to be the really big one, but Navy, terrible. Boston College, terrible. USC looked beatable against Oregon State last week. So we're going to get to what we think is going to happen in those games at the end. But just to wrap up this conversation on the way that we're feeling right now, I think you got to be feeling pretty good if you're Notre Dame, just in the fact that you got it to 2-2 heading into this bye week. And there are some signs that the things that you didn't do well in the first couple of weeks, you're going to get better at as the season progresses.
Yeah, I think maybe if there's one difference between the parallels of last September and this September, as you've outlined, it's backup quarterback compared to a guy who led a Wisconsin to a Big Ten title, even though, as you remember, last September, that wasn't exactly on the stablest of footing, with Cohen eventually getting benched in back-to-back games. That hadn't even happened yet through the first 4 games. And yeah, I guess you don't have a top 15 pick at safety back there, and so I think it's probably still a little bit more of like, I don't, even if you were angsty about Jack Cohn in the moment last year, I think there was a sense of like, this would stabilize probably more than there is right now, even though I think you saw enough from Drew Pyne in the last couple of weeks to at least think this is going to be like competent offense that, yeah, again, you're not going to have to win every week in a slog. And yeah, I think if there's going to be something that we look up and it's like, wow, this played out exactly the last year, it's the offensive line. And you'll remember they get up 6 sacks to Toledo. That was really bad. And then obviously that ended up stabilizing. And I know that the defenses they played in the second half weren't exactly these great pass rushers or just great at stopping much of anything. But when you give up 6 sacks to Toledo, I don't think you can just throw away any progress. And it's the same kind of thing with when you get owned at the line of scrimmage by Marshall and you lose to Marshall. I don't think you can just throw away progress that you saw against North Carolina, where they put up 45 and really left 13 points out there that were easily for the taking between a goal line fumble, a missed field goal, and I forget exactly what the other situation was there, but easily could have gone over 50. And
they went for it on 4th down, I think,
right,
is what you're talking about.
That's right. And that could have been an easy, 42-ish yard field goal there. So, yeah, I think if we look up in 5-6 weeks and you see an offensive line that's playing pretty well, protecting Drew Pyne pretty well, and at least creating the way for a effective ground game that has a little bit of explosiveness mixed in there, I'm not going to be surprised at all.
Yeah, just a couple more things to wrap up on this topic. You mentioned the offense a lot there. Notre Dame did not put up 567 yards in any game last year, which is pretty remarkable because, like you said, they went against some pretty bad defenses. I don't know if they went against a defense that is falling so hard like North Carolina's is right now. Gene Chizik is obviously not the answer, and I think Mac Brown is at the very end of his head coaching tenure. But you got to go all the way back to week 2 of 2019 for the last time Notre Dame put up 567 yards of offense. So you've played a lot of really bad teams between then and now, and somehow this is still the highest total since then. So I think you're feeling good. I saw Nicholas there comment and say, maybe Drew Pyne is better than Tyler Buchner from a raw athleticism and talent perspective. I'm not so sure, but I think Notre Dame has schemed something up for Pyne that makes him maybe as good as Tyler Buchner would be. I think Tyler Buchner, they were a little too married to that zone read, and it just wasn't working out in the first couple games of the season. And obviously Ohio State's got a really good defense, but yeah, my bottom line is I think you're feeling pretty good if you're Notre Dame. Let's move on to a Marcus Freeman conversation. Patrick, I'll give you the floor. As turbulent and crazy as Notre Dame's season has been holistically, for Marcus Freeman, it's had to have been all of that and more, because this is the very beginning of his coaching tenure. All of a sudden, you're the first Notre Dame head coach in program history to go 0-3 in your first 3 games. And I've said it all along. Yeah, 2 of those first 3 were number 9 Oklahoma State in the Fiesta Bowl, and number 2 Ohio State on the road in the Horseshoe season opener, 105,000 people. But 0-3 is 0-3. Patrick, I think Notre Dame has rebounded a little bit. And what have you seen from Marcus Freeman in the last 2 weeks to make you feel like he's kind of on the right track as well?
Yeah, I think honestly, this North Carolina game was a pretty good illustration of like him being on the upswing. And like you look at that game as one that he finally kind of like influenced, where like how many times have you heard coaches, and it's one of they have some version of the same cliche. Like what I've always heard was 4/4 moments, like final 4 minutes of the first half, first 4 minutes of the second half. Like you look at how Notre Dame like controlled and kind of owned that against North Carolina, really because of how Freeman and the offense kind of like dictated that and how they set this up, where score a touchdown, force a 3 and out, go kick a field goal, manage that whole field goal drive correctly, then get the ball to start the second half like you know you're going to do, and then go score a touchdown. And then obviously you get a stop and then another touchdown, and then this thing's it's over basically. So I think you look at that as far as just the in-game decisions and smoothness of it as like something you probably wanted to see in this first 4 games or before the bye week. And that became especially important after the valleys it went into the first couple of games there. So like to be able to head into a bye week saying you outcoach and outmaneuvered a team that has a head coach and defensive coordinator who won national titles, I think that's a pretty good thing for a guy who you probably expected was going to kind of fail before he succeeded, or have to, learn to crawl before he learned to walk, even though the low point of that is beyond the pale of whatever you would have expected with growth points in the loss to Marshall. So that's like the end result of where you're at with the bye week with what you just recently saw from Freeman, I think is good, even if like, yeah, the valleys there are, if they put the alarm bells up a little bit that, wow, this might really be more of an experiment kind of thing in this first year. Like, I think that was a reasonable conclusion at that time, but you just wanted to see eventually how he respond to it. And I think this North Carolina game was a good response. And again, something you want to see more of, but a sign that's like, all right, you don't think of it as much as opponent as the fact that it just happened and there's some kind of growth there. And if you're looking at the opponent, yeah, it was a team that's led by a guy who has a national title.
Yeah, and there's only 5 of those, including that guy, in the country who are currently coaching a college football team. So that's no small feat for Marcus Freeman to go in there on the road and do that. And I never want to say that losing to a MAC team, and I know you made the joke that, hey, let's not rip on the MAC, but Marshall was Marshall. And I don't want to say that is going to be the best thing that a new head coach can endure, is losing to a team like that on home, in your home opener, in the first game that you've ever coached at Notre Dame Stadium. You lose to Marshall 26-21. I don't want to say that's the best thing that can happen, because it's not. Notre Dame would have loved to win that game. All of its fans would have loved to win that game. But that threw Marcus Freeman into the fire right away, because let's think about this. The Oklahoma State game, you get a pass. You're playing without your best offensive player in Kyron Williams. You're playing without your best defensive player in Kyle Hamilton. It's a bowl game. A lot of funky stuff happens. You're coaching against, we're on the conversation of really good head coaches. Mike Gundy is one of those. Go look at his bowl record at Oklahoma State. It's very good. Go look at his overall record. He wins 10 games pretty much every year. And if he's not winning 10 games, he's winning 8 or 9. So that's not a bad loss. You get a pass. You get a pass for losing to Ohio State, the number 3 team in the country. They were the number 2 team in the country on the road against the Heisman Trophy candidate, and you hold that team to under 400 yards. It's averaging well over 500 now through 4 games. You get a pass for that as well. So Marcus Freeman was 0-2, but I don't think anybody was coming for his neck saying, look at his record, it's 0-2. Once you lose to Marshall, though, all bets are off, and we were looking for that when is the honeymoon over period of time. And I don't think Notre Dame fans were ever searching for it, because you want that as long as you can, right? We're not married, Patrick. We're young. We're in our 20s. But when we get married, I'm pretty sure we're going to want to be in Mexico on our honeymoon for 2 weeks if we can. Everybody knows that doesn't happen. You're there for a week. You got to get on the plane. The guy next to you smells. It's all bad. That was the Marshall loss. It smelled. It was bad. He's 0-3. What are you going to do? You go out with a backup quarterback, Drew Pyne. Tommy Rees schemes up an excellent game plan to make him feel comfortable, and Notre Dame wins a scratch-it-out, claw-it-out game against a Power 5 team. Then you go on the road against another Power 5 team with, like you said, a coach that has won a national title, and you beat that team too, a team that was putting up, again, well over 500 yards. It was the same blueprint. It played out differently, but you put up, you're playing a team that puts up well over 500 yards, and you hold them to under 400 yards. So I think there have been some positive signs early in the Marcus Freeman era, despite the 0-3 start. I really wanted to see how he rebounded after that Marshall loss. And you were looking for that North Carolina moment, Patrick. You got it. Now they're 2-2. And like we said, we talked about the schedule a little bit earlier on. We're going to talk about it last segment, but kind of like the overall theme of Notre Dame football right now. I know 2-2 is not what Notre Dame fans wanted. 3-1 at the worst. They wanted to be in the college football playoff conversation. They're not there. But I think this is a team that could win more games than you thought they were going to win 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, I think what you just ended on there is the right way to put it. And I guess I'll wrap it up with this, where it's like you don't want to lose to Marshall. It's not good. Your season ended basically as far as playoff goals with that loss. If it hastens anything or speeds anything up, it's probably maybe stuff you wouldn't have noticed after a win that bites you 3 weeks later, that you just wouldn't have paid attention to or wouldn't have had the urgency to examine after a win, as a loss makes you call everything into question. A loss like that is. So if there's going to be one thing that comes out of that aftermath that's good, and I'm careful of how I word that, because I don't want to say this was a good thing, because it's not. Your season ended right then and there as far as the goals they set. But it's probably that, where it's maybe it lessened the chance that something that was just kind of simmering beneath the surface that might have blown up in the Carrier Dome or something, or what caused the blowout loss against Clemson, or I don't know, somewhere down the road. Maybe was able to be addressed a little bit earlier, and it cleans that up. But yeah, I mean, look, that was a scary loss that ruined it. So, but yeah, you wanted to see the response, and at least as much as you have had a chance to in 2 weeks since, I think that response has been largely good.
Absolutely. And we've mentioned Drew Pyne's name a couple of times. Obviously, if you live under a rock, he is now Notre Dame's starting quarterback, has been so for the last 2 games. He's 2-0 as the Notre Dame starter. And I've mentioned it in a couple articles at blueandgold.com, which, by the way, $1 for 1 year of premium access. That deal is still going on. So go to blueandgold.com. And if you hit the paywall on any of those articles, good thing is you only have to have $1, and you can read all of our premium content. Patrick does an awesome job. Mike Singer, I mentioned earlier, awesome job on the recruiting front. And then obviously you can read all my stuff as well. So go to blueandgold.com to get that stuff. But yeah, like I've said with Drew Pyne and written at blueandgold.com, I don't have the numbers in front of me. I should have them up. But as a starter, he's 41 of 50 something. He's completing over 70% of his passes for close to 500 yards and 5 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. That'll get the job done against anybody you play. And I know it's Cal and I know it's North Carolina, but Patrick Drew Pyne, could Notre Dame have asked anything more of him, or has he done everything that you would expect him to do through 2 games as the Notre Dame starter? And there are the numbers there for Drew Pyne. And we'll just have a quick conversation about Pyne, what you've thought about him so far and what you think he can be in the final 8 games of the regular season for Notre Dame.
Yeah, in terms of everything asked, at least after Tommy Rees screened into a phone at him, I think so. And I know that Cal game plan was like not something that was sustainable or that you wanted to see, or that is even like great offense as a whole, but it worked in that game, and that's what Notre Dame asked him to do. And after sailing a throw that no quarterback at Notre Dame should sail, he managed it properly and just did a good job of taking what was given to him and making the reads in the RPOs. And they called that one play with whether it was Lorenzo Styles or Chris Tyree or Michael Mayer on that RPO where they did a little screen basically and all those guys would turn the corner. Like it's an easy throw, but when you're a backup QB making the first start against a defense where you don't need to be this, crisp, high-end, elite kind of offense, like you just want to see the ball go in receivers' hands. And that's what happened there. And at least they found something efficient enough with Pyne in that game, or competent or functional enough, I think is probably the best word. Right. But yeah, I think it was fair to wonder after that game of like, all right, let's see what happens going forward here. But if you see that kind of plan where his average depth of throw is 2.6 yards, like you're going to have to wonder, how much do they trust him? How much what is this really going to be? Is it going to have to be a slog every week? And although no, North Carolina's defense is not good, like you were worried about it being a slog against any defense, no matter who they played, even if it was you, me, and 9 of our friends. Like, I think it was just important for it to go from like a thing that was functional enough to beat a whatever Pac-12 team to something that can score points and outscore a good offense like it did against North Carolina. And what is that? Like, I don't know that it's Notre Dame finished in yards per play last year, 43rd. Okay, it's 6.14. I'll probably still take the under on that when you look at the total, when we look back at the end of the season and see what did they average with Drew Pyne as a starter. But I think you feel good about it being able to take advantage of what it's given, whether that's a bad defense or just make the right decisions and do enough to win with a defense that should hold, good offenses below what they can produce and make bad offenses have bad days. So I don't think he's going to make wow throws or you're going to air it out with him. And North Carolina wasn't vertical per se, but I think it answered those like questions of, does Notre Dame trust him? And not only is it yes, because they have no choice, but yes, and that's just what they let him do there, where it mixed in a few shots, let him throw in the intermediate range more. And by and large, he made those throws. Yeah, there was that one kind of scramble where he missed to Mayer, one post where he threw Lindsey a little bit too long. And then the sack he took was really having to feel the unblocked pressure there and know that it would mean that another post he had for Lindsey was going to be open with no help and just let that rip. But overall, like, hasn't looked overwhelmed and has done what Notre Dame asked him to do. And what it will probably ask him to do going forward, it will be short of dynamic, but I think it will give him a chance to, again, hit that 8 wins and then we'll see.
So you use the word dynamic there, and I'm going to put you on the spot here because this is a conversation that everybody associated with Notre Dame football is having, especially the fans. The Notre Dame offense with Tyler Buchner, for whatever reason, played a really good Ohio State team in week 1. I think it's inexplicable what happened against Marshall, but maybe we pin that mostly on the offensive line. Do you feel like it was going to figure it out with Tyler Buchner had he stayed healthy to this degree, to the degree of 567 yards against, I know, a terrible North Carolina defense, but 567 yards is that, 567 yards. Do you think it was getting there with Tyler Buchner? Or I present you that quote that Tommy Rees had a couple of weeks ago when he said, Drew Pyne is the perfect guy for Notre Dame right now. Those are his exact words. Where's the disconnect there? Why do you think it ended up being true that Drew Pyne was the perfect guy and that he's played, outside of a couple throws, like you said, almost flawless football for what he's been asked to do? It hasn't been the most prolific football, but it's gotten the job done. Was it getting there with Tyler Buchner, or was a shakeup necessary? And the shoulder injury to Tyler Buckner, I don't want to call it a blessing in disguise because that guy right there that you see on the screen right there won the offseason quarterback competition. And by and large, he should be starting for Notre Dame right now, but that's not the case. So back to my question, Patrick, was it getting there with Tyler Buckner, or was Drew Pyne the perfect guy?
I think it was going to get somewhere better than it was, just because if we're talking about the line improving throughout the year, you have to figure it's going to do that no matter who's back at quarterback. And a little like we were talking about Freeman kind of learning to crawl before he walks. Like I think there was going to be some of that with Buckner, where it's not going to be a finished thing, start one, start two. So you were going to live with some bumps, even if, again, what happened against Marshall was beyond the pale of what should have been expected or would have it all, been foreseen as the low point. But I guess I'll answer that ultimately with a kind of a thought I had coming out of Ohio State, where it was this weird situation where you have a game that went better than expected just based on the betting line alone. Yet I left it almost feeling more down on my, at that point, 10-2 prediction, which sounds weird to say when you have a better showing than I thought at Ohio State. But I just thought it brought out enough like bumps in the offense or signs that this might be a little rockier than we thought throughout the course of the year. And there just might be more tripwire that gets them and, makes it puts it below that prediction that I had before the season. So I know it doesn't directly answer it per se, but that was my kind of lingering thought, leaving Ohio State and processing that game for the next, 24-ish hours after that. And with Pyne, or at least, when you look at the rhythm he and Reese were in and how he can take advantage of whatever defense gives him and look more than just a slog of an offense or a competent offense against bad defenses. Like, I don't know, maybe I wouldn't have been totally stunned if there was one game where they just kind of against a not good defense where the offense kind of completely stubbed its toe. And maybe that was the very next week against Marshall. So I don't want to say no because this is the guy that won the job outright. And I still think everybody had a belief in the ceiling, but maybe you'll get a little bit more steadiness on the floor of it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I left that Ohio State game kind of like you saying Tyler Buckner impressed me from a maturity standpoint for a true sophomore, a moxie type of thing where he wasn't afraid of the moment, but I definitely had concerns with what it could be or maybe maybe the ceiling was a little lower than I thought. Or for that matter, maybe the floor was a little lower than I thought just because of how dynamic he is. But there's something there that you said, bumps and bruises with the offense are kind of like hiccups along the way. In 45 seconds or less, tell me what you want to see more of from the Notre Dame offense.
Yeah, I'm going to start with receivers, where more from Jaden Thomas, who's run 94 routes and has 3 catches, just more Lorenzo Styles overall. If you're going to even mix in a few shots or vertical plays per game, maybe a little bit of Tobias Merriweather. I know that's more complicated and that if he's not ready, that's that. And I think we saw a little bit of a glimpse of why in those 4 or 5 snaps against Cal. But if they're going to be even a little bit of that, and you could use the downfield contested catch presence, maybe there's a little bit of a spot for him to shine there. But yes, more from the receivers. And I'll start mainly with Jaden Thomas. And that if you're going to be out there 94 routes over 4 games, that's almost 25 a game. You've got to do more with that than 3 catches. And I think
totally agree with you on the wide receivers. That's what I would say too, is that Jaden Thomas and Braden Lenzy are pretty much playing entire games here. They're not rotating in at wide receiver. And these guys have combined for 10 catches, I think it is, for less than 100 yards. I think Lorenzo Styles has shown up. He's had 15 catches in his last 3 games, but I think he needs to be more of a 6 to 8 catch per game type of guy, maybe even like a 10 touch type of guy per game, because he's dynamic. He's the best wide receiver that Notre Dame has. You saw it on the 30-yard touchdown against North Carolina. He can do some things those other guys can't, but those other guys need to do some of the things that right now we think they can't, which is get open, catch anything, whether it's a slant and out. You saw a couple, I think there were a couple out routes, and Jaden Thomas caught a couple, Braden Lindsey caught a couple in that last game, but that needs to be baseline. I mean, that needs to happen every single game, and we're seeing it against the worst defense that Notre Dame has played to this point. It needs to be more consistent. So we'll switch gears here and go to the Notre Dame defense, which I think not a lot of people are talking about it because this is a team that basically going as the offense goes right now. You lose to Ohio State because the offense didn't play well. The defense played very well in that game. You lose to Marshall because you only score 21 points against Marshall at home. Against Cal, you beat Cal, but you have less than 300 yards of offense in that game. These are all games, though, that the Notre Dame defense probably played well enough to win in every single one of those. Against North Carolina, a couple garbage time touchdowns. You don't want to give up the 80-yarder. You don't want to give up the 64-yarder. That's a conversation we'll have in a minute. But, Patrick, is this Notre Dame defense as good as what we thought it would be going into the year? I think it's been such a crazy year with talking about what the heck is wrong with the offense and Marcus Freeman's start that we're not talking about the defense a whole lot, but I'm giving you the floor to talk about the defense right now. What have you seen from those guys?
Yeah, I think the last 2 weeks have been more what you expected, and that was a really good North Carolina offense that they held to a lot. That looked a lot worse than the 32 points, and I think they cleared 7 yards per play, mainly because of those 2 garbage time touchdowns. But yeah, like you said, I think they've played well enough to win in all 4 games, but I don't know that anybody in that room would tell you that they played well by their standards. The first 2 games, that is. I mean, they still lost. They got run over in key moments, gave up a lot of rushing yards to Marshall, didn't get anything from the defensive line. Like, how many times did we hear Al Golden that first time after Marshall say, not good enough, not good enough, not good enough? That was like his catchphrase, right? But I think this is the key stat from the last couple of weeks of like, where that they can really kind of like the defensive line and defensive front really being the strength, where against Cal, Jaden Knott, a freshman running back who I know you and I were just talking about it as that game went on, we're pretty impressed with, even in a 32, 33-yard game that Notre Dame held him to. That's a really good player. Notre Dame held to about 2.5 yards a carry. Then last week, he goes out and runs for 279, I think it was. Most by a running back in the FBS this year. And it was against Arizona, like not a bad Mountain West team, like
right.
a Power 5 opponent. And then North Carolina, we'd seen how much they ran over everybody, albeit the Sun Belt teams and an FCS team. Those running backs, Notre Dame held them to 30
I like
yards.
Marion Hampton too. Really good player. But
both of those guys, freshmen who won starting jobs at Power 5 schools. And you don't do that by accident, especially in North Carolina, where they've had really good offenses and good running games. So that, I think, is what you wanted to see. And I think what you see more going forward of than 90-yard drives in the fourth quarter where you just can't get off the field because you're not even getting your opponent to third down because their first down runs are getting 6-7 yards every time. And then defensive line, like I think even in those quiet first 2 games, there was like disappointment in how it played, but maybe not necessarily concern that it was going to play like that all year. So, I mean, look, we've seen that kind of right itself and correct itself the last couple of weeks with Isaiah Foskey just kind of completely taking over games there. And he's got 14 pressures in the last 2 weeks. You saw the run defense really show up in the back-to-back plays on the goal line against North Carolina. So ultimately, I think this is heading in the right direction of where you want it to go. And yeah, the secondary had those busts, and I think those need to get cleaned up. But at the same time, I think you've got the defensive MVP back there and Tariq Bracy and maybe the freshman, or not even freshman, just general surprise of the year, and Ben Morrison already starting 4 games in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'll start with the secondary there. It's one of those things in the North Carolina game where you play so well for so long in that game against Josh Downs, Antoine Green. I really like the tight end. They have a couple tight ends that I really like at North Carolina. You play so well against those guys for so long there, 40 minutes, 45 minutes even almost, that you're like, okay, this is the norm. We should just shut these guys down completely, and Drake May is only going to pass for 200 yards, and we're going to come out of this saying our secondary is like one of the best in the country. At some point, those guys are going to make plays, right? Antoine Green goes right by Clarence Lewis. How many times did we see somebody go by Clarence Lewis in the Fiesta Bowl? Like, we know that is possible. We haven't seen it as much this year, and I think Notre Dame has been so much better for it the fact that Clarence Lewis, who is competing for snaps with Ben Morrison, I think both of them have been really good, and Notre Dame has really reaped the rewards of that. But at some point, Green was going to break free. And I'm not saying it should be an 80-yard touchdown, but if you kind of leave him on an island out there, I think the safety, I can't remember who it was, kind of played too far up, took a bad angle. At that point, Green's running behind two of your guys. He's going to score against anybody in that situation. And then, if it happens twice, you probably shouldn't let it happen the first time, but it happens twice, then it's an issue. But by and large, I think Notre Dame's secondary was awesome in that game, and that's kind of a microcosm of what they've been all year. I mean, look how much they flustered C.J. Stroud in Ohio State, and it was a very conservative. I don't know if conservative is the word, but the Notre Dame secondary was put in a position to succeed in that game. Just keep everything in front of you. Jackson Smith-Njigba obviously was a little banged up, so Notre Dame had some things working in its favor there, but they still performed. They still executed, and I think that's been the case for pretty much the entire season. So if we're talking from a defensive standpoint, I've really liked what the secondary has done. I think the defensive line in the last two games has been awesome. I mean, 6 sacks against Cal, and it probably could have been 10. I think Riley Mills sacking Drake May early in that game on a little bit of a stunt. I think he was lined up on the inside, and you've seen more of Riley Mills at defensive tackle, the last couple of weeks, which is his natural position. I still think he has potential at defensive end, but that's Al Golden and Marcus Freeman saying, hey, we've got this big dude that put in the right situations. Nobody can block this guy, especially when you stunt him with Isaiah Foskey. At that point, you're saying, who the heck do I block if you're the North Carolina offensive line? And they didn't block Riley Mills, and he sacked Drake May. I think that kind of set the tone for the Notre Dame defensive line to play an awesome game again. So the last couple of weeks especially, there's been a lot to like. I know they ran a lot of nickel in this past game, so J.D. Bertrand was missing. You throw 2 linebackers out there. You look at the snap count from that game. You do snap counts at blueandgold.com every week, Patrick. And Maris Leofau and Jack Kaiser played a whole lot of snaps, way more snaps than the next guy. Bo Bauer, what was it, Patrick? Was it like a dozen snaps maybe for Bo Bauer?
I think it was between 7 and 10 off the top of my head. If you give me
So
30 seconds, I'll tell you.
Yeah, not even a dozen snaps for Bo Bauer. So in that game, you're relying heavily on Jack Kaiser and Maris Leofau to make plays. And, I haven't studied those two guys specifically every single game that I've rewatched this year, but I thought they played really well in that game too. And Maris Leofau was flying around to the right places a little bit more than he usually does. And Jack Kaiser, you see him on the screen there, has been an excellent tackler. I think he leads Notre Dame in tackles now. So this has been a pretty complete effort from Notre Dame's defense. And I think it's coming into its own too. With a defense, I mean, with all the levels that there are to it, you want the defense to kind of complement each other and, come into its own and put it all together is the cliche that everybody uses. And I think they're starting to do that. And there are still questions with the Notre Dame offense, like we've mentioned. So if the defense can keep playing this way, when you get into those slogs, Patrick, like you mentioned, that there are probably still a couple slogs out there. Clemson might be a slog. BYU might be a slog in Las Vegas in a week and a half. If the defense keeps playing this well, I think you're in those slogs and you can win them. What does the defense have to do, though, or what have you not seen enough from the defense? And I know the easy answer is turnovers. They just forced their first against North Carolina. But for you, watching these 4 games, you come away saying, man, the Notre Dame defense needs to do more of what?
I'm going to go, like you said, turnovers is easy, and forced might be a little bit of a generous term.
Yeah,
considering
I think
J.D.
it is.
Bertrand wasn't credited with that forced fumble. He created the pressure. Like, not don't get me wrong, he deserves credit for that. But technically wasn't giving the forced fumble because Drake May dropped that. But I'm going to stay on linebackers, though, and I think the reaction to their play the first couple weeks was that they were just like an abomination, was a little bit of an overreaction.
Mhm.
And like, this is a veteran group that's a smart group that's better than that, and wasn't going to put forth that the entire year. But I'm going to say you want to see more like havoc, more disruption from those guys. Like, we saw Maris Leofau do that a lot last fall and then in the spring. And like, we see how intense he is when he like runs into running backs on blitzes and meets tight ends in the hole on the run. Like, that's great because that's just how he plays and plays at that speed, and you don't want to take that out of him. But like, you want to turn that into tackles for loss, into forced fumbles, into more stuffs. I think that's what you're looking for here from the linebacker unit as a whole. Like Jack Kaiser, same kind of thing. Like I think he's probably Notre Dame's best tackler. And like now that he's playing inside more, like more stuffs, more tackles for loss. And I think you've seen some going in the right direction there the last couple of weeks, especially against North Carolina. And like, even if there weren't, loads of non-sack TFLs the last couple of weeks, like the linebackers are right in the middle of holding two really good running games and running backs to production far below what they're going to produce and what Jaden Ott did the very next week. 274 yards, by the way. I said 279 earlier. So and maybe you get a little more Prince Collie mixed in there. I know he was close, and I think he would have been in there more than he has than just a couple of snaps he got the last week. But, he was kind of in and out of camp, had the concussion. But someone who I'm still really high on as far as like adding a degree of explosiveness and playmaking there. And even though the running back kind of just fell on his TFL, that was in part because Collie went up, met a blocker, and moved him. So I think you want to see a little bit more of him, especially, and I think you will in the first half without J.D. Bertrand in there. And like you said, Kaiser and Maris Lufau playing a lot of snaps. But I'll go, even though I think the linebackers have been on the right trajectory the last couple of weeks, more havoc plays from those guys.
Yeah, I am all aboard the Prince Collie train. And if I'm not the conductor, then I paid for a nice little seat in the front car, the ones that recline and you can sleep really easily in. I'm on that Prince Collie train. I think he's really good.
I'll claim conductor because I wrote the story on him in the summer there. But yes, there are seats available in the first class on the train.
There are. And I think it's filling up quickly, though, because we'll get on the message board and it's always, where's Prince Collie? Why didn't Prince Collie play? And I think it's kind of crazy that here we are in week 4 and we're talking about his first defensive snaps of the season, and he still only played, I think it was 10 snaps. Again, you're the snap count guy, but it was right around there again. And I know the linebacker situation was a little different, and I'm not going to toot my own horn here, but before the game, I went into it saying you're going to see a lot of Maris Lufau, you're going to see a lot of Jack Kaiser, especially with J.D. Bertrand serving that first half suspension for the targeting penalty that he had against Cal. But you did see 10 snaps of Prince Collie in a game that it might have called for him, but no game has called for him yet to date in this season. I am fully reclined in that. I think I'm in the seat upright position because I am waiting for him to get on the field a little bit more. It
was exactly 10 snaps against North Carolina, by the way.
Okay, there it is. And I'm going to quickly go ahead and say what I want to see more from the defense is I just talked up the secondary. If you've been with us this whole time, I think Clarence Lewis is playing really well. Benjamin Morrison, Cam Hart had a couple of good plays, and he's been targeted a little bit. I don't know what these coaches have seen in their scouts, but they said, let's go at this guy. And he's given up some, but he's gotten it back some too. I think he's going to get stronger as the season progresses. But how about turnovers from the back end? How about more pass breakups on the back end? A lot of times these Notre Dame defensive backs, who rotate quite a bit, by the way, and they were a little bit depleted against North Carolina, which makes that outing all the more impressive. Ramon Henderson, I was there on the field pregame, and he had a pretty significant brace on his right ankle. So I'm not sure how long that's going to be, but they could be without him. And DJ Brown suffers a little bit of a hamstring thing in that game. But just talking about these guys from, a 30,000 foot view, let's get some more pass breakups out of these guys. Let's see some interceptions. You watch football every given week, and I was watching the game last night. I'm a Dallas Cowboys fan, and you go into a game with Cooper Rush and Daniel Jones, you expect a ton of interceptions, and I think there was only the one there at the end, and it was Trayvon Diggs. But, those are the type of plays that Notre Dame has, the type of defensive backs who can make those plays. Maybe it's Ramon Henderson. Maybe it's Brandon Joseph. There's been some issues with his tackling. He can make up for that with an interception or a flying across the field type of PBU that you think that only Kyle Hamilton can make. But I've seen the athleticism out of this guy to know that it's in there somewhere. So I don't know if these guys feel like they're playing a little bit handcuffed or handicapped, and that, they're so hell-bent on not making mistakes that they end up not making plays as a result. But I think these defensive backs are good enough to, maybe it's the bye week what they need. They come out and say, hey, let's watch some film here. And that play that I was just like in the general area for, maybe I can turn that into an interception or a big time PBU, and we get more momentum going forward. So I don't know if you have anything to say on the defensive backs from that standpoint, Patrick, but that's the kind of way that I've felt about them. pretty much in all 4 games now.
Yeah, I agree. You want to see more breakups, and particularly from Brandon Joseph. I think you were expecting, even I know you still got 2/3 of the season through the first 4 games, probably expecting a little bit more than one pass breakup and the highlight play being a hit that knocked out Jackson Smith and Jigba. As much as that helped, although hey, maybe that hit where he didn't play the rest of the game helps than any individual pass breakup he could have made against Ohio State.
Yeah.
Maybe, but you still want to see more plays on the ball because it's in there with him of like range and man coverage skills, atypical of safeties, where like you can just make pass breakups and interceptions that just few safeties can because of those physical gifts. I think you want to see those more overall. And Cam Hart, like I think for a guy who most would agree last season was a pretty good starting debut season for him, been probably a little more up and down than you wanted to see as far as like what kind of jumps does he take in year 2. But I think you want to see that stabilize a little bit more. But if and when that does, like another guy you're looking at as far as someone who can get a hand on the ball more often than Notre Dame's secondary collectively has so far.
And there's that hit that Patrick was talking about. And in an era in which they review everything for targeting, ask JD Bertrand, that didn't even nobody even thought to look at it. So I haven't seen that play, the video form, in a little bit. When I saw it back the first time, I think he kind of hit him in the back or the shoulder, and he definitely wasn't going for his head. Led with the shoulder, which is very key. Ask JD Bertrand again. So yeah, Brandon Joseph has a lot in the tank. I think he's leaving a little bit in there, though. Maybe it's time for him to push that pedal down a little bit. I know gas prices are pretty high right now, but use what you got in there, man. We're going to do a quick little segment here, and we're going to have to make this one fast, Patrick, but we're going to do 2 things we like and 2 things we don't like, and we're going to have one of each for both of us. And I've kind of already talked about both of my picks, so I'm not going to belabor on mine too much, and I'll give it to you after that. But what I like, Drew Pyne, given the keys to an 0-2 team, said, here you go, man. You're going to start your first college football game in your 3rd year at Notre Dame, and you're going to have to dig the Fighting Irish out of a hole that it hasn't seen since 2016. This is a team that hadn't had a losing record since 2016, hadn't lost its I don't think it lost its first 2 games, but it hadn't been 2 games under 500 since that year. Here you go, and he's done it, and he's looked really good, really shaky. I've been a Drew Pyne proponent for pretty much the entire time I've covered Notre Dame. I just like the moxie, the Conor McGregor stuff, inject that right into the veins, but he didn't have that Conor McGregor stuff against Cal in that first series, really that whole first quarter. You mentioned the video from Tommy Rees earlier, told him to do his bleeping job and that the whole bleeping team was counting on him. And since then, he's been dynamite. So if you're a Notre Dame fan, I think you have to like it. You don't have to have the feeling that, he is the type of guy that Notre Dame should have starting at quarterback, because I think there's a little bit more out there for Notre Dame than a 5'11 and a half, 198 pounds soaking wet quarterback who there's questions about his arm strength and can he make all the throws and all of that. He's done everything that you've needed through 2 games. You have to like that if you're a Notre Dame fan. What you don't like if you're a Notre Dame fan is who he's throwing the ball to outside of Michael Mayer, Lorenzo Styles, Chris Tyree, and probably right now, Audric Estime. I think those 4 guys, and Audric Estime only has 3 catches, by the way, so I'll leave it at 3 guys, Mayer, Tyree, Styles. Notre Dame needs some people to step up at wide receiver. We talked about it earlier in this show. Whether it's Jaden Thomas, whether Tobias Merriweather not only gets on the field, but actually gets some looks downfield and they trust Drew Pyne to throw to him, or they trust him to run the route where they say, hey, this ball's coming to you, whatever it is, those 2 guys have to show up. Braden Lenzy has to get more involved. Kevin Bauman's out for the year with an ACL injury. Maybe it's Eli Raridan or Holden Stays, 2 freshman tight ends that we thought looked really good in fall camp, especially as receiving threats. So I like Drew Pyne. I do not like who he's throwing the ball to outside of less than a handful of guys.
Yeah, I'll touch on mine and then just add one thing on the receivers. Like, I don't know that it's the sign of the healthiest passing game where just 2 of the top 6 pass catchers, or unless I'm reading the outdated stat, but one of your top 3, I know that's the case, is a wide receiver, but it's just kind of where Notre Dame is at right now, and you can't like this isn't free agency. You can't sign somebody. So you're just going to have to make do with what it is. And, I think you're already operating maybe what short of ceiling and ideals that you were thinking of going into the season anyway. So you may as well just lean into those strengths. And right now that's a tight end who is as good as anybody else out there, and a running back who you just want to get the ball in space to as much as possible. But what I like, Tariq Bracy, I think he's a defensive MVP through 4 games. I wrote as much in a story yesterday at blueandgold.com. And like, not only has he been really reliable in the slot, as far as like, if there's anything in front of him, the guy's on the ground right away. There's very little yards after catch there when he's in the vicinity. I think he's tackled really, really well in a way that you maybe haven't seen quite as much. He has 3 tackles for loss this year. He had 2 in his first 4 years. Like, you see him just react to plays in front of him faster, break on them quicker. You see him beat blocks to get guys down after screens in a way he didn't before, whether that was like putting a move on a guy to get around him or just reacting to it fast enough where the guy can't get a hand on him. So you want 11 guys like this year's version of Tariq Bracy on your defense. So, yeah, maybe if Isaiah Foskey keeps playing the way he's playing, he's going to be the defensive MVP at the end of the year. But as far as like biggest surprise, most improved, and most important through 4 games, or at least most consistent through 4 games, it's absolutely number 28. But I'm actually going to stay there for what I don't like, and it's the pass breakups. And you touched on it a little bit earlier, but I'll read you the number here. Notre Dame is tied with Colorado for 128th in the FBS with 8 pass breakups.
You don't want to be tied with Colorado in anything.
No. They're like Rutgers level, like bottom barrel Rutgers level bad. Probably the worst team in the Power 5.
Yeah.
And the only teams they're above are Stanford, who you, as Notre Dame fans have watched firsthand, has not been very good on defense for a few years now, and Charlotte, who is in Conference USA and soon to be AAC, but still, like, that's not the company you want to keep, and nor is 2 pass breakups a game where you want to be. And I know in some ways it's a little bit of the product of who they played, like Marshall, with how horizontal it was throwing and how short it was throwing. That's going to give you a limited number of pass breakups, and they only threw it 21 times, I think, that game. But you're going to get teams that are going to go vertical on you more in the upcoming schedule, that you've got to be able to get your hand on the football more often. BYU is going to test vertically more. Stanford is going to try to go vertically a little bit more. Clemson even going to do that, and you saw how that offense has seemed to take a step forward recently.
DJU's looking pretty good.
And yeah, exactly. Like, that was, he just put up 5 touchdowns. Like, that's maybe more of an offensive challenge than you thought it would be a month ago. USC going to try to test you vertically. So that's going to be something you need to have more reliably than what an average of 2 pass breakups, no interceptions is giving you now.
So you just kind of went through the schedule here, and this is going to be our last segment of the night on this Notre Dame Football Update live show with Tyler Horka and Patrick Engel. Okay, I'm going to preface this by saying a lot for me rode on that North Carolina game, and if they were to lose that, full disclosure here, we do a magazine, obviously Blue and Gold Illustrated. Our picks come in pretty early to try to meet those magazine deadlines, and I picked Notre Dame to lose to North Carolina, wrong, but I picked Notre Dame to beat BYU, which obviously that's still up in the air. I'm not so certain I'm going to change that pick. If you were a guy that said Notre Dame's going to go 1-1 in those 2 games and that's that, I think I leave that game, and looking at what BYU has done, only beating Wyoming 38-24 last week, the defense has had issues for BYU. I leave that game, North Carolina and Notre Dame, saying they could probably beat BYU. So we're going to go through these very quickly, Patrick, kind of one by one. I'm going to say what I think is going to happen today on September 27th, and then you tell me what you think is going to happen. I'll start with BYU. I think they're going to go in there, and Notre Dame is going to win in a kind of – I don't know if it's going to be sloggy, but it's going to be sloppy, and it's going to be close. I think Notre Dame beats BYU.
I was one of those guys they're going to go 1-1 in those next 2 games, and I picked Notre Dame to beat North Carolina. So I'm still kind of kicking it around, but
right, because
that definitely had an impact. Yeah.
Yeah, you're in my camp where maybe that game changed your mind one way or the other, or at least influenced it.
It's heavily influenced it. The more I've thought about it, the more I think they just might kind of eke out that, lower scoring-ish game that has some sloppiness, but where they're able to just make one more throw, get one more 3rd down conversion, or get one more Michael Mayer big play than BYU is able to find and pull it out. So I For right now, I'm flipping that around, and I think Notre Dame comes out with a win there.
I know we said the same thing about Marshall, but Stanford and UNLV are just not very good. And I think a lot of people thought Stanford would take this step forward this year. It hasn't happened. UNLV has been at the bottom of the FBS in so many metrics for so many years. I think Notre Dame wins both of those games at home, especially playing at Notre Dame Stadium, where they kind of got that first win there not out of their system, but in their system. And they know that they can beat the teams they're supposed to beat at home. So what is that? I have 2 more wins, and I have Notre Dame improving to 5-2 after those 2 games.
I'm with you there. I don't think if they can put up yards on North Carolina and confuse a good North Carolina offense, they can do what they need to do on offense against those 2 teams and keep their offenses at bay. I don't think either of those is ultimately going to be this threat to actually be sitting there 5 minutes in the fourth quarter of like, whoa, Notre Dame is actually, this thing's a toss-up.
The game that I think can be that, especially because it's on the road and it's a week before you play a team that's been in the top 5 in the country all year and is probably going to be there that day as well, is Syracuse. And this is a game that is literally a month away. I don't know which way to go either way, but I still think maybe Notre Dame is a team that is like trending toward a very middling season, and that's the type of game that can trip you up against a Syracuse team that has started 4-0 and I think is ranked in one of the polls. Offense has looked pretty good. Defense has looked pretty good. I think I'm leaning toward, because the North Carolina game it was not a cure-all for me, and I'm not, even after the Cal game, I was sitting there saying, I'm still not so sold on this Notre Dame team. I think something crazy happens in that game and Notre Dame comes out of it with a loss. I don't know if you're there, Patrick, but and this can change in the next month, but a month away, I'm a little hesitant to pick what would be a 4 or 5 game winning streak for Notre Dame right now going into that Clemson game.
Yeah, as am I. And we talked about going 1-1 in a 2-game span.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if they can get to 2-0, or maybe they will go 1-1 between BYU and Syracuse. Right. And those are the 2 kind of what feel like toss-up games. And I don't know if this team is good enough to make those like automatic or even pull them out. So, yeah, I'm a believer in so far what Syracuse has done. Their offensive coordinator hire has made a really big difference. A guy who was at Virginia last year and made that offense look really, really hard to guard when they had their starting quarterback, which obviously they didn't against Notre Dame last year. I think they're gonna go 1-1 in between BYU and Syracuse. And I guess if I pick BYU to win, I got to take the loss here. But hold me more to 1-1 between those 2 games than win BYU, lost Syracuse. Stuff still gets weird at the Carrier Dome. It's what it's always known as. It's like the Sears Tower. You can't get it to never not be that.
It is definitely. I don't even know what JMA Wireless is. No. All of these phone companies do so many commercials. Maybe I have seen a JMA Wireless commercial, but it's not resonating. So I'm going to continue to call it the Carrier Dome. Clemson, I've been calling it a loss all year, even in the preseason when some people said, I don't know about Clemson. The quarterback situation is up in the air and all these other things. I think the secondary has been a lot worse than Dabo Swinney would like it to be. He had a quote this weekend. It might have been a quote of the weekend where he was just straight up asked, how'd your secondary play? And he said, well, they gave up 6 passing touchdowns, but they didn't give up 7. And that's all we needed to win. So maybe they can be had, but I think it's more of a situation where the front that Clemson has might do enough to get to Drew Pyne, who somebody made a comment here saying, yeah, he's had some nice runs, but if he's running for his life against Clemson, that's not a recipe for victory for Notre Dame. I think it could be a little more sloggy than we think, but you mentioned that Clemson's offense is turning it on a little bit. I've been calling this a loss since preseason. I'm sticking with that.
I am too. I was a little less in on the preseason. Clemson is not itself ever again.
Mm-hmm.
And in the same vein, I think I'm a little hesitant to say, Clemson's defense is collapsed, knocked off the throne after one game there against an offense from Wake Forest that has given a lot of teams trouble in the last year and 4 games now. Slow mesh, hard to guard, really hard to defend. and Clemson saw that firsthand. But I'm stuck with a loss there.
Okay, so Navy to me is like the equivalent of an SEC school scheduling an FCS opponent. Like the week before Alabama plays Auburn in the Iron Bowl, they're playing Mercer or somebody like that. That's what this is. That's an easy win for Notre Dame. And then they come home and play a Boston College team that has, by all accounts, had a absolutely disastrous season. There's people calling for Phil Dracovic. I don't know if he was replaced in that game. I didn't study it too much, but people are saying maybe we need to look elsewhere at quarterback. So it hasn't been a very good start to the John McNulty offensive coordinator tenure at Boston College. Notre Dame's going to win that game pretty easily and set up a really big game in the regular season finale there at USC. So I've got win-win Navy Boston College. I don't know if you have anything else to say on those two teams.
That's exactly how I have it. I guess I'll add this. I don't know. Maybe this is just a lukewarm take. The margin of victory Notre Dame has over Navy will be larger than that against UNLV.
Okay, there you go. Lukewarm, kind of like the water that I've been drinking throughout this episode. USC is another game where I've been predicting it as a loss since the preseason. I was pretty much 50-50 on it. And when we had to make our season-long predictions for Blue and Gold Illustrated, I didn't know what to do because I didn't know what USC would be. Here's my lukewarm take, because I think some other people are having the same take. What they did against Oregon State, a program that's kind of on the rise. I've liked what Oregon State has done the past couple of years, especially this year as well. They're looking pretty solid. 17-14 was not the offensive outburst that you thought a USC was going to have in every single game this season, but they found a way to win a game like that. And a game like that is probably going to be closer to what the Notre Dame game is going to be because of Notre Dame's defense. So in LA, I think USC is going to be playing. Obviously, the Pac-12 doesn't ride on that game, but I think they're going to be playing for a lot of pride and saying maybe USC, Notre Dame is like finally back and USC can compete in this game, because last year it certainly didn't. And that was a game that you kind of just wanted to be over if you snapped your fingers. But this game's going to be entirely different. I have USC winning that game. So I guess if you look at it from what I just said, I have Notre Dame losing 3 of its final 8 games, and that would be a 7-5 season, which if you were looking at the rest of Notre Dame's schedule and knowing what you knew about Notre Dame after the Marshall loss, and even after the Cal win, I think a lot of people were saying 7-5. I think a lot of people are still getting their hopes up for like 9-3. I don't want to talk to anybody who thinks 10-2 is on the table, because I just don't think Notre Dame has what it takes to run the table at this point. But 7-5 is not the Notre Dame that people have known the last 5 years, but neither was an 0-2 start and a 7-point victory over Cal. So you lose to 2 really good teams in the final 8 games, and you lose one of those toss-up games that you mentioned, Patrick. I don't think that's the worst-case scenario, especially with the way the season started.
Yeah, I thought this USC game was a toss-up-ish too, that I thought maybe Notre Dame would win preseason. Now I think it's a little bit less so with where Notre Dame is at. And if USC keeps getting turnovers at the rate they are, which is the best way to mask a defense that's not particularly talented and was really, really bad last year. So I'll go USC winning there, and that would put me at 7-5 too, which I think really the suspense is that, and the interesting thread to follow here is, can you make the toss-up games that we talked about, BYU and Syracuse, can you find a way to win both of those? I think that'd be a good, like, just sign of progress for what this season has become and just where Notre Dame is, and a good sign of Marcus Freeman and how he can impact and how he grows and maybe how he impacts one of those games. So if it gets to 8-4 and, you know, they have just a moment of, all right, this is a team that was on its QB that began the year as the backup against a top 10-ish, top 5, whatever they end up being, USC or Clemson, like, okay, maybe that's just, you know, due for one of those at this point. But if you can make the toss-up-ish games end up winning both of those, I think that'd be a really, really good outcome. And then, of course, take care of business in the games that you're supposed to take care of business in.
I'll take it a step further. Take care of business in the games you're supposed to take care of business in. Win both of those toss-ups, BYU and Syracuse, and find a way to maybe beat Clemson, who's not the Clemson of 3-4 years ago, or beat a Lincoln Riley-led USC team that, yeah, they're much better than they were last year, and they're getting those turnovers that you mentioned, and the offense looks really good for the most part outside of the Oregon State game. But that team is still beatable, and Notre Dame knows how to beat USC. You win the Syracuse and the BYU game, and you win one of those two games, you're 9-3, which is exactly what I predicted before the season started. And I think you're feeling pretty good about yourself. I think winning all of those, and like I said, running the table is a little too much to ask, but I think we know a little bit more about where the Notre Dame season is headed. Some people a couple weeks ago would have said 6-6, maybe 5-7, and they're missing a bowl game. I don't think Notre Dame is that team. They've showed me enough in the last 2 weeks to say that they're going to win some ball games down the stretch. But we definitely appreciate you guys for sticking with us here for just over an hour on the Blue and Gold YouTube channel. Go ahead and subscribe to this if you haven't already. And like I said a little bit earlier on, go to blueandgold.com and pay $1 for 1 year of premium access. That's 12 months of, to me, the best Notre Dame coverage that you can find on the internet. Patrick just wrote a couple stories today about a basketball commit. Women's basketball is going to be firing up here soon. Hockey starts this weekend. Fall ball. We might even have some stories about the baseball team. We've got everything at blueandgold.com. Patrick knows that. Mike Singer, our recruiting reporter, knows that. But like I said, thanks for sticking with us for an hour, and we will see you guys next time.